This is Ms. DB, and in this video I'm going to do a few more examples on the solutions for the Chapter 5, Section 6 assignment on the quadratic formula. So in number 1, part of this is done. We already have that a would be 1, that's the coefficient in front of the x squared term. B is 1 because it's a plus x, which is the same as plus 1x. And c is negative 1 because it's minus 1 for the last term, the constant. So in here, you're going to replace b with 1, and you're going to replace b squared with 1 squared, and you replace 4a is 1, and c is negative 1, and 2 times a is 1. So a lot of 1's in this problem. And that's what I have right here. Now to simplify this, you have to be really careful because of all of these numbers, all of these parts. Don't forget that it's plus or minus. It's very important. There's going to be 2 answers when you're done. You need the plus or minus to get both of those answers. All right, 1 squared is 1. Whatever your b is, you will get a positive number when you square it, because if you have a positive number and you square it, you get a positive number. But also if you have a negative number and you square it, that becomes positive, because negative 3 times negative 3 would be a positive 9. That's not part of this problem, but I'm just reminding you as it comes up. So I would have the square root of 1 minus, okay, 4 times 1 is 4, times negative 1 would be negative 4. So I have minus a negative 4, which is going to be plus 4, all over 2 times 1 is 2. And then the 1 plus 4 is 5, so you get the square root of 5. That's the only part I changed. Now you can leave your answer like this. Or you could write it as negative 1 plus the square root of 5 over 2, and the other answer would be negative 1 minus the square root of 5 over 2. Sometimes you'll separate them. If you have a perfect square here, like square root of 4, then you would separate both parts and find both parts, because you'll have 2 integer answers. Or at least maybe fractions, but at least they'll simplify more. Okay, number 2, I've already got the solution here, but let me just talk through it a little bit. A is 1 because there's no number in front of the x squared term, so the coefficient is 1. B is a negative 8, not 8, negative 8, and c is 10. The sign in front of each number, each term has to go with it. So when you replace in your quadratic formula, which is at the top here, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. When you replace all of those parts with a equals 1, b equals negative 8, and c equals 10, this is what you should get. Now notice that when I do the b squared, I put the b in parentheses. I didn't mean for my b to have a negative in front. It's just the way it ended up when I touched it. Let me try to erase that. Well, I erased the whole thing. So when you do b squared, whatever your b was, that's what you square. So if it's negative 8 squared is a positive 64. And then you go minus 4ac. That's 4 times 1 is 4 times 10 is 40 over 2. And so then you end up with 8 plus or minus square root of 24 over 2. Now here's where some of you are having problems, is simplifying the square root of 24. Don't forget the plus or minus too. That's another thing people are forgetting. The square root of 24 could be written as the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. You can only do that for multiplication, for products, when you multiply 2 things together, not for adding or subtracting inside a radical. But that means that now we have a perfect square of square root of 4, which is 2. The square root of 6 cannot be simplified. So the square root of 24 simplifies to 2 times the square root of 6. We still need a plus or minus in here. So we have 8 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 6 all over 2. Now, every one of these terms are divisible by 2. So then you could write this as, do I still have a pen here? Yes. You could write this as 8 over 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 6 over 2. You could separate it into its 2 parts. 8 over 2 is 4. 2 over 2, that simplifies to 1, so that's just square root of 6. Notice that the square root of 6 does not get divided by 2. Just the number in front can be divided by 2. So your answer is either, you could write it like this, or you could write 4 plus square root of 6 and 4 minus square root of 6. Here's number 3, all done and all worked out. If you need help with that one, you can pause the video here and see if you have any questions. This one's interesting because it turns out that underneath the square root sign, you get a perfect square, 64. The square root of 64 is just 8. So then you write it your 2 different ways with your plus and your minus, and you'll get 2 integer answers for this one. All right, now number 4 I didn't do yet, so let's do this one. Negative b, let's go back, oh, my b is coming with me. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's our quadratic formula. I guess it didn't come back. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. What? Why did it erase? Does it come back? No. Okay, I must have touched something somewhere. Wow, it's super. It doesn't want to let me do it. Maybe if I take a little pause before each, that's supposed to be a minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, now a in this problem is 2. B is negative 16. C is 27. So those are the numbers that I'm going to replace in this equation. Here's the B. Oops, I underlined A. Here's the B. And then what else do I need? I need the A. Here's the A. A goes here and here. And then here's the C. C only goes here. So I forgot to underline B, or else it erased itself. There we go. Okay, so B is negative 16. So I have negative 16. I'm just going to write 32. I'm going to write 16. Negative 16 is positive 16. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. That's going to be negative 16 squared. I put it in parentheses, and then a is 2 and c is 27. All over 2a. Oh, but I should put a is 2. Okay, next, this is what x is going to be equal to. 16 plus or minus. Now, negative 16 squared is 256, positive 256. Not sure what 4 times 2 times 27 is. $216. So I have minus 216 all over 4. All right, so now I've got x equals 16 plus or minus 256 minus 216 is 40. So I have the square root of 40 all over 4. Getting there. Now I have to simplify the square root of 40. I'm going to rewrite that as the square root of 4 times the square root of 10. I did that because I know that the square root of 4 is just 2, so I'll be able to simplify in my next step. Plus or minus 2 square root of 10 all over 4. Now you may want to simplify this because you can see that these are all even numbers, so there's going to be something divisible by 2. I'm going to write it in 2 parts. I'm going to say that this is 16 over 4 plus or minus 2 over 4 times the square root of 10. Just another way of writing the same thing. Because 16 over 4 is 4, and 2 over 4 is 1/2. So I could write this as 1/2 times the square root of 10, or you could write square root of 10 over 2. But in any case, this is a simplified form of that. I'm going to leave 5 for another time. A or B would be -1, so you might want to check if you're doing this one, or if you did it and you got it wrong, you might want to check that you use -1 for B, but when you square it, you'd still get 1. Number 6, I have finished already. This one, we get another perfect square inside the radical when we simplify, and the square root of 16 is just 4. So then we have our 2 situations. when it's plus in between, and when it's minus in between, and we simplify it and we get integer answers, which is always kind of a bonus. All right, here's one that I wanted to take a little more time with. In number 7, A was 2, B was -2, and C is 3. When we plug these numbers in, we're going to get a negative number underneath the square root. We're going to get the square root of -20, because we get -2 squared is 4, and 4 times 2 is 8, times 3 is 24. So we have 4 minus 24, which is -20. All right, so we have to simplify that. This is how we simplify it. We write this as the square root of -1 times the square root of 20, positive 20, because the square root of -1 is I. And now I have the square root of 20, which I'm going to write as the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. Again, we're using square root of 4 because it's a perfect square. Square root of 4 is 2. So I have I times 2 times square root of 5. We don't ever put the I and then the number, so we're going to rewrite this as 2I times the square root of 5. And that's what I have right here. So we still had in this problem 2 plus or minus, and now it's 2I square root of 5, and then the whole thing was being divided by 4. Again, each of these numbers are divisible by 2. You could write it in 2 parts, 2/4 plus or minus 2I over 4 times the square root of 5. We never divide the square root by the number on the bottom. It's just the numbers in front you would divide. So this would simplify to 1/2 plus or minus I over 2, times the square root of 5. Or you can write it all over 2 like I did in this, the way I wrote it here. Let's see, how do I stop inking? I was just going to hit an enter sign so we could do number 8 all on one page. Here's the answer to 8. Again, we're going to get a negative square root of 12. So because we had 36 minus 48. 36 minus 48, so that's -12. So then you have to simplify the square root of -12. And I do that by writing this as the square root of -1 times the square root of 12. And square root of -1 is I. And the square root of 12 can be the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. And then that's I times 2 times the square root of 3. But we always put the 2 first and then the I. So with this, all square root of -12 simplifies to 2I square root of 3, which is right here. And here's number 9. Number 9 had the square root of -20 again, but we just used the square root of -20. We just simplified that, so now we know how to do that one. And that's all of the ones that you have to solve with the quadratic formula. So if you have any other questions, please let me know. And I will be happy to work more with you on these. Thank you very much and have a great day.